Hey, it's Chris Maylander. This is AHA with Chris Maylander, and this is going to be the last episode. There are now 17, and each one of these episodes has been designed with the intentional purpose of being a short point of inspiration or provocation to how you think about your own decision making. And I hope it's proven out to be a useful tool as you're in the car or running or on the treadmill or what have you, as something that is in this bite-sized, intensive, that creates a reflection in your own mind about, I might want to approach this issue in a different way, or here's some guardrails that I can use. I'm excited to announce that on the heels of this, another podcast will be soon launched, which is guest-based, and it's focused on interviewing individuals that I find particularly interesting and fascinating who have faced their own critical moments in decision-making. And these are the kinds of folks that we want to learn from. We want to understand their reflections about what they could have done better in the past, as well as how they capitalized on particular decision opportunities as they have arisen. They're the sorts of decisions that happen behind closed doors and in private moments, and that you don't typically get the opportunity to observe, study, hear from them, and go deeper with it. So I'm particularly excited about what's coming and what's coming down the pike. For today, and as this last episode, I want to talk about a line of decision making that is a bit diverse. And I think it has tremendous asset value for those organizations who can implement this. Typically, it's easier to make decisions which are on a shorter timeline. So it's easier to make decisions that are required within the next week or the next month, next quarter, because we know what the decision architecture is. We know the variables for how we're going to measure success, whether it's financially or operationally, strategically, our competitive state, and so forth. We know precisely what the timeline is, and therefore all the pieces of the puzzle start to come together. It's where a lot of organizations become extraordinarily adept and efficient, because these decisions then start to develop a routine and an efficiency, a rhythm associated with it. What they lack, however, oftentimes is that ability to create a decision architecture for longer range decisions, those decisions that are going to take 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years down the road. It's where they need to be much more creative, innovative, irrational, illogical. You want to create an environment in which people have the opportunity to make non-logical correlations between distinct ideas. You want to create hybrid vigor, which is bringing together two different systems or atoms or ideas. And as a product of that, you create something which is significantly greater in value, and it has new tendencies and new patterns associated with it. Most organizations I work with do not focus on this. They do not make it an intentional practice. It's not transparently described, except that they'll put an annual number out there, or a market share position number out there in the long distance, et cetera. But then it's kind of just left, and you hope that you hit that number in the long run. The key ingredient to creating this foundational layer of long range decision making is patience. This is about patient curation of ideas, allowing people to play with those ideas, again, in a very intentional way, intentionally being illogical, irrational, creative, innovative, exploring, experimenting and failing, dissenting. And there's a couple of techniques that you want to integrate into this, one of which is being very clear about time and the use of the timeline here. So when we have finite timelines, our decision-making architecture becomes much more well-defined, for better or for worse. There are times, the second ingredient is, after time, is transparency, which is there are times when we want to be very transparent about how we are making decisions, what the outcomes are expected, and so forth. However, it is a mistake in this long-range decision-making to be too transparent about what you identify as the outcomes, financially speaking, strategically speaking, or from a market share perspective, for example. We have discussed that in prior episodes, that at the national and global stage, there have been major failures at times of an executive leader predefining what outcome they seek, and then the team lining into that outcome and the strategy that that leads to it, because that's what groupthink does to us. In this case, we want to create that environment where we're much more opaque, that allows the freedom to create and think in new ways and define new outcomes, new pathways. The final ingredient that I think is particularly essential to this other strata of foundational decision-making within an organization for the long term is around cognitive friction. This is distinct from friction in the sense of acrimony between the team, yelling, shouting, aggressive timelines, heads down type of working, etc. That is oftentimes endemic with the routinized regular decision architecture, or when you're under leverage. There's been a trigger point. Something has changed. There's a crisis, a market share shift, a competitor action, or a crisis on the team. And people then take those more immediate friction-oriented steps in order to get to the outcomes that they desire. Cognitive friction is something different, and I love it as a tool, as a technique in the mix, which is focused on creating friction between logical ideas, taking regular patterns, regular frameworks for decision-making, and blowing them up intentionally, curating that on purpose to say, we need to take this apart, blow it up, and then rebuild it. What we're looking for in this instance is improvements in analysis, improvements in how a team makes decisions and debates, what the argumentation is. It allows the opportunity to see how a team and team members perceive, react, and think under different conditions. And then what you're doing is also preconditioning them for how they will respond when you actually are in the live fire event. When the critical moment is actually in front of us, they will have been preconditioned for how they respond and behave in those instances. By that point in time, we will have a game plan. There is a playbook that will be built for how we're going to deal with these situations. But the long road to getting there requires patience in intentionally setting up the framework for a looser decision-making architecture that favors friction, chaos, experimentation, non-linear pathways, and not predetermine or biasing the process by setting up the outcomes and the potential strategy for getting there too soon. So factor this in as you think about your longer range decision making. This is the request for this episode, is that in your own organization, do you have a proper decision architecture that addresses these longer range issues? These are the issues which are going to reshape what products and service you're able to offer. It's going to reshape, most importantly sometimes, your ecosystem and your role within an ecosystem. That is your partners, your vendors, your relationships, the people that come together with you, that you both want to grow and evolve the state of that ecosystem so that it is the strongest ecosystem within your environment that you're a part of, and you can create value within that. How do you create those ecosystems? It's not through a terribly logical process that is finite in its duration and has a lot of rigid rules. You do it through the intentional curation of a long-term arc with looser rules, but with the same amount of intentionality and healthy doses of patience. That's all for now. I look forward to talking to you soon.